All right. Welcome, everybody. Welcome back, Sarah, especially. I don't know that we really need to introduce ourselves. Our infamy probably precedes us.
Possibly. Do you remember who you are? That's the main thing. Do you remember who you are?
At my age, it's intermittent.
Waking up is always an advantage every morning. It's like, ooh, I made it through the night.
Yeah, oh, bloody hell, another day.
As long as you don't forget where you've stashed the whiskey, you're all right.
Well,
No,
that's
that's the
never,
problem,
never
isn't it?
far from the bedside. Well, what are we going to talk about today? We were talking in the green room a minute ago. We just had another core update from Google that makes life interesting for a day or two.
Yeah.
As all the our colleagues go shooting off on tangents and misinterpretations. And I said all our colleagues, some of our colleagues.
Yeah. I only like call updates for the opportunity to quickly pull John aside and ask him if it's a hardcore or a soft call update.
Yeah.
Interesting webinar the other day. Did you catch the one, the Duda webinar with Martin Split?
I did not. I've got it bookmarked. Did not get a chance to tune in.
It
was a good one.
I jumped in a few times with stupid questions, and it was a good one. It was very interesting. Go on, Ammon.
Well, I only asked the one single question in that one, but it was particularly about whether there were likely to be any changes to the rendering process and the basic indexing process in the light of the expected increase in content due to AI. You know, we all know that AI is creating this deluge of fresh content. The number of people I'm hearing about who've created, 100 articles, 100 guest posts, whatever, with AI, and then are complaining that it doesn't seem to be doing much for them. We've all seen reports of people, building out 1,000-page websites almost entirely out of AI, and it does great for a few days until Google actually works out what it's about, and it dies. So we know that there is an increase in demand on the crawling and indexing process. Because even if you determine that this is crap and we're not going to index it, you've had to grab it and look at it to make that determination in a lot of cases. So I was wondering whether there was any plans to simplify or downgrade the systems at all. And they said, no, absolutely not. And I would be pretty confident that Martin would know if there had been any discussion of it. So I found that particularly reassuring, because that means it is kind of where I was expecting it to be. What I noticed a couple of years back was some changes to the crawl prioritization. And it looks like all of the scalability they believe that they need at this time is in that crawl prioritization. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So it certainly does. And they knew what was coming. It's scalable. It's going to be adjustable. To simplify the algorithms and what goes on in there would be a backward step, and it'd probably take them more computing power than, even though they're doing bits and pieces quicker. Yeah, I think he gave a very good answer, and it was good to hear it as well. So
yes. Yeah, I particularly, because that was my one question. I knew that crawl prioritization had changed, but my worry was, is the system also going to change? Are they going to put stricter thresholds? Is it going to be harder to get rendered and indexed? Is it going to slow down? But to an extent it will, because crawl prioritization does that. The more content there is, across the board, then obviously there's more high level content, there's more mid-level content, and there's more low level content in terms of priority. And if there's more high priority, that means it takes longer before the bot has enough empty space in its schedule to get to the midpoint. And the more there is there, the longer it takes to get down to the low priority stuff. And a lot of stuff may be depending on extra signals now. And those extra signals are things like, is this a keyword that's trending? Is Google seeing a lot more demand in this, in keywords related to this, and therefore it looks for links that relate to this that it hasn't crawled yet? It looks for fresh info, especially when something is suffering burstiness, trending, hitting the news, anything like that.
Yeah, I'm a bit of a doubting Thomas on the whole AI content thing. I just, to me, the easy way from Google's standpoint would be to simply say, if we detect this as AI, we're not even going to mess with it. We're going to kick it to the curb.
The problem is that AI actually does write better than the average human who's out there creating guest posts and articles. And there's a lot of dross out there. There's a lot of people who quite honestly should have been replaced with AI long ago. Some of them could have been replaced with a speak and spell, to be honest, and it's still better.
That's true. But in terms of the value in the content, AI is not bringing anything to the table.
It depends on the source that you give it, the prompts and the source data. And now that we've got, quite a few AIs that can pull in from outside sources, whether it's web pages, whether it's documents that have already been filled out, you can give it a spreadsheet, and that spreadsheet could be a Google sheet that is actually taking data from lots of different points into the spreadsheet, and then the AI looks at that spreadsheet and bases things on there. The thing is, of course, AI is not great at this right now. It's not LLM based AI. They are very poor at prioritizing. They have very poor logic chains. They can do very simple logic tasks, and actually they performed better than expected because it doesn't have a logic module as you'd think of it. But a lot of the time, just predicting what the answer would be fudges enough logic to get there. But the minute you have to, okay, I want you to write an article of 300 words. I want you to write an article of 2,000 words, where each section of these sections is 300 words. I want you to give time. You're giving it a multi-step process. It's very poor at knowing the order to do those things in.
It also doesn't count very well.
No.
One thing that I have seen it seems to put out some pretty good quality on is, for instance, if you give it a prompt to explain the difference between this, and that, and then ask it to elaborate, and give a more detailed explanation, the elaboration seems to be pretty good. It still is a bit repetitive, where they'll actually say the same thing twice or three times, but not as much as in the initial take. So, when you're looking at a comparison of 2 or 3 items and you ask it for elaboration, I do see some added value there, because, like you say, an awful lot of dross is out there that should never have been published and is just flat unreadable and unintelligible.
Yeah,
so
absolutely.
Most of them are doing better at that than your average human writer.
I think
However,
things, Doc, is one is, as Ammon said earlier, it's the prompts. You have to start with the right prompts, because if it's big, it doesn't know where to start. So if you can give it a prompt and then, give it some hints about what you want included, in that section and go section by section rather than write me the whole article, it seems to do a much better job. So one way you can approach it is the logic of the overall article. So give me an outline of an article on whatever, right? And it goes do, 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 do. And then it's up to, this is where the human part comes in. It's up to you, the human, to see if the logic of that outline makes sense for what you want to say about whatever that topic is. Then you can go in and ask it to elaborate on each section, and you can give it things like keywords or topics. Be sure to include this and this while you're discussing big topic X. And that the value of it is only as good as the human input, in my opinion, and the human review, because it does do that repetitive stuff and you just have to, you know, get rid of it and make some logical connections yourself where you actually write words, you know. So I think it can be helpful, but it needs a lot of tending and monitoring, I guess, the way I look at it.
Although what I found is that AI is very good at proofreading and editing.
Yes.
Actually, you write, you know,
Mm-hmm.
stuff, and then it tidies it up because it's very good imposing the right patterns and order and spellings, you know, the stuff that's in a large language model. You know, it's not a large
Yeah.
logic model. It's not a large intelligence module. It's a large language model, and it's very, very good at putting language together in the proper way. And
That's right.
therefore,
So it catches things like, you know, in school when the instructor would write awkward next to a sentence, it makes those go away.
yeah. Now, where this can be used is if you've already got a source of user-generated content, and it's, you know, as we all expect, there's a lot of typos, there's stuff put in by people for whom that's not their first language.
Mhm.
Well, AI is wonderful at clearing that up and putting it all together into a solid narrative, a kind of overview, a reader's digest of what's been said in this forum or in this comment area or in a whole series of reviews. And so it can produce very good content if you're giving it the human experience and creativity first in a very raw form, and then using its editing to make that actually really good. And now there, AI is actually doing better than the humans, isn't it, Doc? And therefore,
Yep.
Google would want to index that.
Yeah, for editing, I can definitely see it having some benefits.
And I think that that's where I would suggest people look at the moment, is getting it to tidy up. With large language model AI, this is specifically, you know, there are other AI that are very good at logic. There are other AI that are very good machine learning algorithms that are very good at solving specific problems. And those can do analysis, and those can do things that an LLM cannot. An LLM is very, very good at then translating that into a wonderful piece of language. My feeling is that, sorry, go on, Simon.
I talking of prompts, I recently last week I think it was, I grabbed a few bios of fairly famous SEO people and ran them through a prompt that said write with more arrogance, and what came out was absolutely hilarious. One or two hardly changed at all. There was so much arrogance in them already, but stuff like that, putting different angles on what you've written is really interesting.
Yes.
If you want to write a piece with certain intent, you've written something, yeah, it's okay, you've written it yourself, but chuck it in there and say, please rewrite this with X intent on it and stuff. And it comes up with some very, very interesting results. And yes, well, unlike Zara, the rest of us are fairly mediocre writers. And it helps. That's what it's for.
I generally don't like it as an original writer because by definition, everything it creates is derivative. You know, everything is derived from what it's read elsewhere. If you ask an AI to come up with anything creative, it doesn't. It emulates the patterns it knows. Sometimes it's putting those things in together in ways that haven't been done, but we're talking innovation and tweaking rather than actual invention.
On TV now. Oh. You're a pretty one then. Let's see here.
So we're interrupting there, Zara.
I'm sorry.
We'll be interrupting there.
No, my neighbor comes over to help me because there's some things I can't do physically.
Good. That's good to hear.
Yeah.
So yes, Ammon, I'm seeing AI appearing in more and more tools, but not as a great big generate everything for this. This piece, etc., but just little bits and pieces. AI spin this up and etc. So even Wix has now got an AI description generator, and once you put your content on the page, you can click that and think it comes up with a description.
Yeah,
based upon what you've got in the page.
I've been waiting to see somebody come out with a an AI-based tool to, for instance, do a content strategy, or the basis of a content strategy for a website, because I could see that being a time saver.
Yes, and there are prompts for this. I help out with the AI PRM forum, and there's lots of prompts that promise to do this. And honestly, they're all garbage, because these are the things where LLM is not good. LLM isn't good at logic. It's not good at complex steps. And it doesn't understand, it will produce you a wonderful looking, really, authoritative reading piece of text, but it didn't use problem solving or analysis or knowledge to get there. It got there by predicting what would be the most likely response it would read in other people's documents that had done those, but it didn't use them to get there. So it's a pure guess. In anything analytical, LLM is simply the world's most verbose magic 8-ball.
That's a great description. I love it.
And if you ask it to do anything analytical, you might as well just be shaking that magic 8-ball and then generating 1,000 words instead of maybe. It's not good at those tasks. It doesn't have logic. It doesn't have common sense. It's not very good at understanding cause and effect. Now, if you don't understand cause and effect, you cannot do anything to do with planning. It cannot create a content strategy because it does not understand cause and effect. And if you ask an AI, how good are LLMs at predicting cause and effect, they'll tell you they're not. That's one of the inherent weaknesses of LLM-based AI. There are others that are great at it. But LLM-based AI are not there. I think that's the problem that AI is having the most trouble with right now, is that so many people expect AI to be like a Star Trek computer.
Right. Where
they just say, oh, great, hot, and it gets on with it. It's doing all of these wonderful, super intelligent things for them. Well, no, that's not what an LLM does. It's a large language model. It just puts words together in the right patterns. And it's very good at that. And if you have it in editing tasks, or you want to get your presentation into a more expected format that flows better, well, yeah, it will know those patterns of language and those patterns of presentations, and it's very good at doing that for you. It will impose the expected patterns, which are predominantly based on its excellent training set. So it's great at that, but do not ask it to do anything that requires actual intelligence, because it doesn't have intelligence as we understand it.
And
Yeah,
I, and I have
doesn't do critical thinking,
That's
so
right.
and
yeah.
I have questions, doubts that it's going to be in the next decade or two that we actually see that intelligence embedded into it, because that, I think we're a long way from that. I do see, there are some uses for it. I haven't played with it much because I'm just not by nature an early adopter, excuse me. I just I have too many doubts about its validity. The hallucination is a major issue, the repetitiveness in writing. But for instance, I can see one of the, we've all made fun of Google Translate, which has gotten
Yes.
admittedly a lot better in the last couple of years. But to grammatically and idiomatically, in terms of what region of Mexico, for instance, if I want to translate an English document into Spanish for readers in Chiapas, okay, then once there is an LLM, a Spanish-based LLM that could be regionalized, then I could get one heck of a fine translation out of that.
Yeah.
And that's not, from a technological standpoint, all they lack is the model. They just need that language model, and they could do that. So I could see multilingual translations become a lot better.
Yes, and to be honest, some of them are already doing much better than the translation machines, even though that they've been trained on English. They've got enough documents with just enough of the language to understand how to translate from one to another. And there's been some wonderful examples of that. If I remember rightly, DeepMind has an LLM-based AI. I think it's Palm-based, but it's translating very early prehistoric runic scripts into English.
Wow.
And it is an LLM based AI. It just it can take lots and lots of different fragments that wouldn't be easily interpreted by a human, just a surviving sentence here and a surviving sentence there, but it put them together and it can actually do quite a lot of work, because they're very, very good at discovering the patterns in language. So yeah, translations, those are actually relatively quickly trained. I think at the moment, most people aren't seeing enough financial incentive to build them.
Yeah.
Look at the automatic captions that YouTube has, and they're appalling. And they've been appalling for years. And we know that the state of AI and auto translation and transcription is way beyond this stage. It just isn't a priority for them right now.
Yeah.
Which is a shame, because of the companies that can afford to do this for the science and for the greater good, I would say that Google are at the forefront. And I think this is a huge lost opportunity by Google to do the kind of things that used to make them feel really good about themselves.
Well said.
One area that LLMs work really well in, we haven't talked about yet, is coding. I'm using GitHub's Copilot, which is sat there helping me in my code program, and I'll start typing something. It'll just fill out the next line, and I'll look at it and go, "That's ridiculous." Hit the return key, or I might go, "That's exactly what I want," and hit the tab button, and I'll put it in. And because there are pattern matching there, and it's fairly easy thing to do. What I'm not going in and saying, write me a program to do this, although apparently people are doing that, and writing some nefarious code for bits and pieces very easily. So for me, banging out a bit of HTML and CSS, it's making it a lot easier. I did try writing an API call with JavaScript stuff last week, which is way out of my depth normally, and it failed because I don't understand JavaScript. It was giving me some very good answers and I got a good way with it, but it failed. But that's actually taught me a lot I would not have been able to learn otherwise, because it was sticking there and figuring. I actually did go to ChatGPT and get some ideas for that, as well as the GitHub Copilot. So yeah,
and it's amazing
all levels
how fast that's come along, how far and how fast. And there's still problems. Remember, you know, the same ones we're talking about, the LLMs, regardless of application, are bad at. If you've got a lot of different steps and it has to put them in the right order, it can get very confused. When you're coding, that's fine. But if you give it a prompt that, you know, I want to do this, and it's a very complex set of functions and it has to be solved in just the right order, LLMs are bad at that, even though it may find in its databases enough patterns that have solved that before that it guesses. If yours is a typical application that a lot of people have already published programs for, then there's a very good chance that it's going to guess right. But if you've got something that is different and has to be done in a different order, then no matter how precise your prompt, if it's multi-step, it can fail because it can't get the steps in the right order, and you need to break it down, give it subroutines, and it will code those subroutines for you. But putting them together in the right order may be up to you.
Simon, have you tried doing anything, you mentioned coding, in terms of generating schema?
Yes, I
good.
did. It was good. Yeah, it's very good.
Okay. That's what I had read from a couple of people that had. I think you have to be a little bit more precise in your prompts. You're going to have to tell it, perhaps identify the type of entity you're dealing with, that sort of thing. But that, again, I think that's an area that can be a tremendous time saver for a lot of people.
It certainly can. Schema can be very, very fragile if you don't get it quite right, especially if you're doing JSON as opposed to inline tags, etc. Yeah, it can really, really help with that.
Great.
The one thing, obviously, that I would caution on is, you know, if anyone's doing this, make sure that it's areas of schema that haven't changed recently.
Yeah.
Because, of course, LLMs are based on data sets that are a couple of years old. Now, if you pick something that hasn't changed in a couple of years, it's going to do great. If you're picking something that has just changed last year or in the last 6 months, do not trust it. It doesn't know. You know, to the LLM, it really is still 2021.
But also run it, whatever your outputs, run it through schema.org's validation.
Oh, definitely, yeah.
Yeah.
Before you put it anywhere.
And understand it may miss recently added tags that it just doesn't know about, you know, the properties and attributes that just didn't exist when it was trained. You know, it's a couple of years out of date. But then again, a lot of webmasters and SEOs are at least 5 years out of date, and some of them a lot more.
Or 25.
So yeah, you know, what I'm waiting for, and it may not take that long. Doc, you said, you know, you don't see it happening in the next decade at least. I think the next step is an overseer AI, basically a project manager AI that uses multiple AI in different steps. It determines the steps of a program, hands them over to various different types of AI, and then pulls them all together so that it's not just an LLM-based AI. Mm-hmm. Have you seen DeepMind's Alpha Dev? the news about that?
Oh, heard of it,
Oh,
but I
look it up because it is wonderful stuff. This is Alpha Dev is a derivative of AlphaGo, which is their game playing AI. You know, the one that worked out how to completely cheat several games. You know, was playing these games in ways that no human had ever thought of, and was slaughtering these games. Well, Alpha Dev is a derivative of that's tuned towards more useful applications than just games. It's been able to solve complex computations in new ways. It's created code that is 70% faster. It's created ways of computing things. One of them is sorting items in a list. The way that a computer does this, you know, is pretty standard. We all know how it's done. Well, Alpha Dev came up with a whole different way of handling this, which is, if I remember rightly, 70% faster, which is a massive.
That's huge.
Step. And this very same AI has made other steps, you know, 30%, 50%. It's really been able to do some cracking stuff in finding new ways to calculate things, new ways to measure things, because it's a much more experimental kind of AI. It's a learning AI, whereas of course LLMs are all pre-trained. The LLMs we're allowed to play with are all pre-trained. You know, the one thing they don't want to do is allow us to train an LLM, because, well, we all remember what happened with Taybot, Microsoft's chatbot that it released on Twitter, and within 24 hours was a misogynistic Nazi. Yeah, you know, people ruined it by cross-training it, so to speak. So LLMs learning from that deliberately built in systems that prevent them learning from people. That's one reason why the working memory of ChatGPT was initially so small. You know, only so many tokens, was you couldn't possibly train it or influence it too far in that amount of characters. Obviously, GPT, you've got a lot more characters, and you can get it to go further off track, but it still won't remember those between sessions. And that's because, of course, they're shared LLMs, and no one person can be allowed to train something that millions of different people are going to need to use. But your own LLM, yeah, you can train it on all kinds of things. And that's I think, where immediate uses for LLMs are already very, very promising.
So how do you think Google might use DeepMind in its search operations?
Oh, there's been so many different examples of things that Alphabet and Google in particular have bought from DeepMind prior to this. Of course, now they're unified. It's now officially called Google DeepMind, because Google Labs and DeepMind were merged and meshed. One of their things was there was a program that DeepMind came up with that made power generators, power stations, 30% more efficient. And the same algorithmic process could make data centers 30% more efficient. And of course, you know, Google used that straight away. The idea of generation being that much easier to manage. You know, when you've got a data center with literally hundreds of thousands of CPUs chugging away in there, eating power, something that can take 30% of that cost away, or mean that you have to use 30% less resources to get the same effect. You know, that's massive, and Google is definitely using stuff like that. They implemented a DeepMind created algorithm into local search, particularly in Google Maps when it's presenting routes to get somewhere. This AI took, and again, it was a 30%, up to 30% off journey times by better planning the route, by better understanding when to go off route, the different traffic flow of a narrow, this narrow country lane may look like, there's no traffic on that, but we know that this thing's got a speed limit of 60 and that's got a speed limit of 30. But of course, the chances of always being able to go 60 on a 60-mile-an-hour road, tell that to anyone who's ever been on the M25. That there's no point even having speed limits on that because nobody's ever seen them. A lot of the time when people need Google Maps, it's because traffic flow is not optimal and they're looking for an alternate route. If you think of it, how often we do the same journeys again and again, and when people turn to things like maps to journey plan, it's either a completely new route to them, doesn't really matter then how long it takes, or they're looking for an alternate route, different to the usual, and that's where an algorithm that can better understand how the real world of those narrow lanes and shortcuts applies, it's fantastic. So these things have been in search for a couple of years. Google bought these and they are in use. We know that Hummingbird brought in machine learning and AI. We don't know all of the different steps it's doing, but we do know that BERT was around at that time. We know that MOM has come in since then. There's a lot of different AIs in use in different specific steps, and I think that's the thing. Google hadn't been doing much with LLMs, and that's why OpenAI really caught them off guard when they released ChatGPT. It was the form that Google and DeepMind alike were the least familiar with, because it was the least practical for their kind of needs. They wanted the ones that really are analytical and are finding new ways to do things better, which LLMs don't do. But they did have Palm, which is interesting. MedPalm is a particular example that has thrilled me. This is the medical version of Palm, where it does it interacts with patients. It's not quite as accurate at diagnosing as a human doctor is, although it's in the ballpark. But what was most interesting to me is it gives harmful misdiagnosis less often than a human.
Wow, that's amazing.
Yeah.
It's not amazing now that I think about it, because I've been in close contact with the medical world for the past several weeks after I got home, and there's miscommunication. I had one conversation where I couldn't believe we were both in the same conversation. I've had to double check things with other people. So I don't find that as surprising as it sounds.
No, but that is an amazingly interesting thing, and it's something that DeepMind had achieved before ChatGPT version 1 was released, which is why I knew that ChatGPT is interesting. But when Google do decide to fire back properly, I think DeepMind are more than well equipped to do this. What Google hadn't done is, of course, they'd done all of their testing, limited tests, carefully reviewed, not let loose on the wild public. So their safety precautions for misuse were not there. And I think that trying to guess where to put those is why Bard was disappointing in many ways by comparison. Although I did like the fact that Bard gives you 3 alternate answers, because that reminds you straight away that no matter how authoritative each answer sounds, because of the way LLMs predict and look like they really know what they're talking about, the very fact that actually there's 3 different answers that I'm telling you, lets you know that you need to check. And I think that's a very useful thing. I do look forward to the next generation, but I do think that hybrid AI is where we have to go. You know, the human brain doesn't have one function, and the whole brain doesn't do each task. We have these different sections of the brain that are tuned for specific tasks. We have an area for memory. We have an area that's very good at taking visual information and making it make sense. We have areas to handle pre-programmed instincts. We have the automated AI that makes sure we keep breathing and our heart keeps beating. You know, we've got all of these different symptoms in our sections in our own brain, and I think an AI needs to have that flexibility as well. You will not get one AI that does all the things, but rather lots of different kinds of AI with an editor or overseer to make sure that the right pieces are doing the right tasks at the right time, and then processing that all together to get the right answer.
I think the overseer idea is, I agree with you, entirely the way to go. I'll give you an example. 2 days ago, I was in Google Maps. A song came on the radio, and I, in Google Maps, typed search for Paradise City, where the grass is green, the girls are pretty, and it couldn't find anything. And it would be great just if it popped up and realized what I typed and said your nearest record shop is here, but it didn't. Just said I can't find it.
Right.
So in that sort of situation, it would be really useful to then understand what's being asked and farm it off to something else and get an answer back and do it. Obviously not there yet.
And I generally think that we are just 15 to 20 years from where you put that in, and it would tell you which radio station is playing that, and where their head office is, and you know, maybe where you'll get better reception. I do think we are within 15 years of that point.
I did toot that, and a mate came back and said, "Are you listening to radio too?" Because he was as well.
Yeah.
So yes,
Excellent. Yeah, and I do think AI is fascinating. You all know that I love all the psychology stuff, and I have always loved algorithms, and putting those two things together, a machine brain, is just wonderful for me. And particularly then the feedback loop of looking at how human psychology reacts to AI, you know, why people are so convinced that this is a Star Trek level computer, how anthropomorphism is playing into people wanting to believe that AI is much smarter than it is. Why are people taken in so easily by LLMs? Back before we had any crawling LLMs, you know, you tell people it's relying on past data, and they say, no, look, I've asked it. I asked it about this company. They've picked a headline from a news story and asked it to summarize it, or they've given it a URL which has keywords in the URL and basically gives you those points, and they couldn't understand that it was generating this just from the keywords in the URL or in the question, because guess what? News stories are one of the most predictable formats of writing that exists, and press releases in particular are designed to be almost a template form.
Well, they are, yeah.
They are template, yeah.
Yeah. So if you say such and such a company, Washington, and that company doesn't have an office in Washington, it's probably going to already guess that that company has just opened up a new big plant in Washington, because that's the only news story that would make sense. And because they were giving it news, that's what its guess was right. And they're going, look, see, it must be able to access the internet. No. It's just playing mind games with you and being predictable. You are being predictable too. You know, humans are more predictable than machines.
But of course, what's happening is that people are looking at what's going on here. And journalists are worried about the jobs, and rightly so, because there are proprietors of media organizations saying, great, we can cut our staff bills, we can just use AI to write all this content and just have a few people editing it, just making sure it's okay. I'm sure that there are people doing that already.
Yes.
I think CNET have been using AI surreptitiously and screwing things up terribly. And no doubt at some point somebody's going to go to court and it'll get blamed on AI writing stuff, and somebody's going to lose a lot of money. So it's interesting how that's all going to fit, how it's going to fit into the general world of the populace, and how it's going to affect people's jobs, and what's going to be lost and what's going to shift. But there certainly are a lot of company owners who are looking at AI as a way of reducing their staff overheads.
Yes.
And their costs.
And as long as they don't think of replacing all of their staff, but rather think of replacing the right kind of work that those staff do, so that they can have, you know, half the staff or a quarter of the staff just focus on the things that LLMs aren't good at, they're going to do very well out of that. And you know, this is the AI revolution that I warn people about. You know, this is, it's not that it's going to replace all lawyers. It's not that it's going to replace all accountants. It's not that it's going to replace all writers. But what it is going to do is massively reduce the number that are needed, and it's going to automate a lot of their work for them, so that 2 can do the work of 10 quite easily.
Then it could happen the other way around. Rather than reducing your workforce by 3/4, there's only a quarter of them left, you could do 4 times as much, whatever it is you do.
More throughput.
By retraining those people that AI is doing stuff now to manage that stuff. And instead of having a team of writers and a few editors, you have a big team of all editors, and the AI writes stuff and everybody edits it and chucks out the rubbish. But then, do we need 4 times as much newspaper content? No.
Exactly. We don't, and we don't need. You know, this is one of the big mistakes that a lot of people are making, and why I say do not use AI to write for you. It's great at editing for you, but do not use it to write for you, because you're going in entirely the wrong direction. Remember that more and more people are turning to AI instead of doing search and reading websites. They're asking the AI to generate the answer for them. They don't want to read articles. If they want to read articles written by AI, they're just going to ask the AI to write it. So if you're investing a lot of time and effort into AI generated content, frankly, you're an idiot. You haven't joined the dots. People will be going to AI for that. What they're going to be turning to the internet for is the stuff that AI can't answer for them. The human experience, the human reviews.
Like asking SGE to give you an answer.
Well, a lot of people are actually finding that ChatGPT is very good at answering natural language questions for them. It may not be right, but then again, go to Google results, and often the answers you get in there aren't right either. There's a lot of idiots writing a lot of content.
I've been just lately returning more and more to get answers from ChatGPT, because Google just won't give me answers that I'm looking for. Complex questions, not simple stuff. They always, Google seems to get the intent wrong now. Seems to ignore that I put things in quotes, seems to ignore that I'm minusing stuff to make sure I don't get that. And I go to ChatGPT and I'm typing the stuff in, and if I don't get the answer, at least I get some other words I can use in a search. So the combination of the two is helping me, because I would consider myself to be a power search user, like all of us here. So when I go and search something on Google, and I'm got a quite long tail complex question, and I just get loads of rubbish answers to that question, because it spotted certain keywords in that thing and said, oh, you put in shoe, here's some shoe adverts, or here's some things, and it's like, this used to be better. I'm sure it used to be better than this.
It did, and it does feel like a lot of the old search operators that we used to use don't work properly anymore. It's as if the intent and query rewriting stuff is happening after the search operators instead of alongside. And again, I think this is the logic of AI, failing. That it's not understanding that this rule overrides all other, and that, answer the question and then reapply that rule, check that rule is still there. Exactly as you get with asking it to write an article of exactly so many words. It often fails because it just doesn't apply that counting step at the right time in its process. But yeah, I feel like you. I think Google have got better for the idiots, perhaps. At the one-word queries and two-word queries, it can be great. But at complex queries and precise queries, I find Google extremely disappointing, and it's been headed that way literally since Hummingbird, which didn't surprise me because it's something I predicted with Hummingbird. I said that, query rewriting is a mixed bag, because I deliberately sometimes use a term like bespoke tailoring. I don't want custom fit. The kind of people who use the words custom fit are the kind of companies that I'm trying to avoid by choosing bespoke tailoring. I definitely don't want one size fits all, because Google's associated those words with this thing. No. Bespoke tailoring. Thank you very much. I am very precise in my use of language, and I find Google is now terrible at it because it keeps on using synonyms when I didn't want it to. If I want you to use synonyms, I'd ask a bloody American.
Nice shot, right across the bow. So you have conversed with Americans, so I didn't realize you were bilingual, Ammon.
I am. Used to communicating with people for whom English is not a native language.
Interestingly, I use Quora. This little anecdote, I use Quora quite a bit.
Yeah.
And some troll was talking about how the Brits are so, actually he used the term Britisher, which is a red flag.
Yeah.
They're so sad and depressed because of their crappy weather. And I jumped in there, ripped him a new one. I've got like 8,700 upvotes on that that response. Man. But there's an awful lot of comments in there talking about the bastardization of the English language by the North American influence, and it's not false.
No, and I think the thing that really plays into that is, America is not the only colony that Great Britain's, set out. The Canadians, the Australians, the New Zealanders, in fact, even nations that only learned English by sending over, rich family kids to Oxford, all managed to correct English. There's one colony that felt they had to dumb it down because their populace couldn't cope with the idea of colour having a U in it. And it literally was that. American English was simplified because it was felt that it was too complex for the citizens. And I think dumbing down, well, we've just had this conversation, haven't we, about Google search.
Well, that was a brilliant move, though, because as it turned out, with the development of our, or devolution, I should say, of our educational system, dumbed down English ended up working out real well.
No,
you see, this is it.
I think it's really sad. People don't know American, don't know how to use clauses or subordinate clauses, and I get confused by messages I get, and then I'm like, oh, you didn't really mean that. What you really meant was, but they have no clue that the sentence that they just wrote is all backwards.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And I had funny enough, it was encore. It was a discussion. Why are the British so hard to beat? And most of the things were on about the English Channel and how being an island, forced everyone for centuries to face the Royal Navy. And I said, no. Being an island plays a very small part in that.
Yep.
Because Britain is somewhat isolated, they had to be more self-reliant. Because of this land mass being all they had, I think some of the wealth of different accents and cultures in a relatively small space in the UK is because we're an island. We don't have to then cope with thousands of people from outside as well. I think somewhere the size of America, although isn't it odd, America has less of an ear for accents, even though it's got so many less of them. The American ear for accents is very poor compared to the English, who, they can almost tell which block you're from in England. You've got the Towns accent, you've got a Manchester accent, but they can tell which part of Manchester as well. And Americans really do not get that sometimes when they come over, and they're just gobsmacked by the fact that, we hear that, and we, ask people where they're from. How did they know we weren't from here? Not only do we know that you're not from here, but we know that you used to live here because we can hear that accent as well as your birth accent, which is over there. You do meet people who are phenomenal with accents, and most of us aren't that good, but the British ear is very attuned to accents. I think the English language is one of our secret weapons. It gives itself over to, well, obviously wordplay. You know how much the English love double entendres and wordplay generally, which creates an agile mind. We've got a language which is very, very rich and adapts easily. And I think that the English language is one of our secret weapons. I think it has led to a way of thinking, which is why the British tend to be very innovative and very inventive. You look at the size of this landmass and how many of the world's inventions have come from here, and we're definitely batting above our average.
You just made me think of Pun My Word with Wilfred Hyde White, and how they had all the puns at the beginning, but then at the end, each one had to make up a story based on the pun of a phrase. That was just one of my favorite programs, which is long gone, but
yeah, and I think things like that are very good. I think that's something that America did itself a disservice in dumbing down the language for, because I think the language in itself is a building block with which the mind develops concepts. Most of us think in words and pictures. And if you don't have a rich set of words, you're not going to have the fine detail in those mental constructs and models.
Many years ago, the Episcopal Church, which is part of the Anglican Communion, dumbed down their Book of Common Prayer with this horrible, awful, clunky language, and all the richness of the flow and the phrases, all of that was gone. And I think that I'm trying to agree with you, Ammon, in a different way, but I think that hearing language flow like that, so that the ideas within one sentence, the ideas flow from one thing to another, and emphasize something, teaches minds how to think in a pattern. And if the language is dumbed down, then it makes thinking I don't know how to say this. That thinking isn't part of the natural part of participating in language, because each little thing is a chunk.
Well, which brings up a very interesting point, Sarah, because, as a writer, it's so important to know your audience. And, if you're writing a book that you expect an English audience to enjoy, your style is going to be dramatically different from what you expect an American audience to enjoy.
Mhm.
And if you try to hit both in one book, you're going to lose an awful lot of potential audience.
Mhm.
Harry Potter.
But it's just, I think it's gotten worse. I know it's gotten worse in my lifetime, because I had, for instance, in high school, my English teacher was a Cambridge graduate. Okay, he was an American citizen, but he had graduated from Cambridge, and the man was eloquent.
Yeah.
He was insufferable. Okay, but he was an amazing teacher.
I like him already.
And he just, he managed to get that across to us. Okay. And an awful lot of my graduating class was 200 people, and 198 of them were Latino, Mexican Americans.
Uh-huh.
And so English was a second language for some of them, or at least an acquired language, a second language for the rest of the folks in their household. So it was even more challenging for them. But today, it's radically different, because now you're trying to write, if you're writing to an American audience, you have to take into consideration the fact that there is a very limited amount of literacy out there. And I don't mean I'm not trying to make that sound like I think all Americans are illiterate by any means, but there are a bunch who are functionally illiterate. Now, those folks may not be lining up at a bookstore to buy your book anyway, granted, unless they need something to prop their busted leg side table up with. But it's just, it's sad, and it seems to be continuously devolving.
Well, it is. I mean, I think it's sad, not so much from I'm not going to go into publishing world, but I think it's sad just from a communication standpoint when you're speaking with other people. And, if you use any kind of complex sentence structure, people get lost in one sentence. And it's just like, how can this possibly be?
What surprises me the most about that is that so often the people getting lost in a complex sentence are the politicians trying to utter that sentence.
Yes.
You keep thinking that their speech
It's
writers
true.
really should have come up with something shorter.
You would think, eh?
Anyway, I see that we are at the top of the hour.
Oh, we are.
So we're pretty much done for this week. Does anyone have anything interesting in the week ahead that they'd like to share with us? Didn't think so.
Nope.
I'm having a few drinks with friends this weekend. Looking forward to that. Anyone else?
I'm just gearing I need to sort myself with a haircut before Brighton in a few weeks. So looking forward to that.
Brighton will be awesome as ever. Sadly, not going to this one, but yeah, I absolutely hope you have a great time there.
And Brighton is still the one at the top of my wish list.
Me too.
One of these days.
There is one in November in San Diego.
Yes, there is.
Well, it's not Brighton. San Diego, trust me, San Diego is not Brighton.
Yeah, no. It's going to be different. I think it's going to be interesting. I think it's going to be good, but it's not going to be Brighton SEO.
No. Well,
especially if it hasn't got the same pub and there isn't me and Simon sat in the Man of War with a pint waiting for you.
Yeah.
True.
Okay, everyone. Lovely talking. Thanks to the audience, both of you. And I think only one of them made it this week. But yeah, both of you, if you catch up with this episode, Thanks a lot, everyone, and see you next time.